One thing that's been surprisingly inconsistent across the Far Cry series is the way in which the weapons system works. Different games have used different progression, unlocks, customization, and gameplay for the guns that form the basic core of the Far Cry experience, and opinions on which system is best vary widely among players. In this video, I'm going to propose a comprehensive weapon system for Far Cry 6, bringing in some new ideas in addition to what I think has worked well in the past. As always, feel free to let me know what you think and whether you agree or disagree with my ideas. Unlike some other parts of this upcoming game that I've made videos about, we actually do know a little bit about how the weapons will work in Far Cry 6. In an interview with Game Rant all the way back in July of last year, narrative director Navid Kavari described the setting of Yara, which is heavily inspired by Cuba, as a living postcard frozen in time because the island has been blockaded and cut off from the outside world and its modern technology and other imports for so long. He says that this not only applies to vehicles, but also that it applies to the type of weapons that you're going to find in the game. His statement seems to imply that the guns in the game will often be makeshift and possibly in need of repair, which is corroborated by several screenshots that show weapons that aren't exactly in perfect condition. This may mean that weapon degradation similar to Far Cry 2 is returning, where weapons become more likely to jam, misfire, and break after extensive use. Additionally, the way he phrases his statement, saying we will find the guns in the game, could just be meant figuratively, but it could also indicate that guns will need to be discovered or crafted instead of simply purchased. Alternatively, Kavari's characterization of the weapons in Far Cry 6 might be a sign that Far Cry New Dawn's system is returning, where weapons of varying quality and craftsmanship do different levels of damage to differently tiered enemies. Hopefully that isn't the case, as New Dawn's system, while innovative, made the combat clunky and awkward, and unnecessarily slowed the pace of the progression without many real benefits. Lastly, it should be noted that not all guns are necessarily going to align with the makeshift style, as the shotgun being held by the character in this screenshot appears to be in pretty good condition. With all of these possibilities in mind, let's get into what I propose for an ideal comprehensive weapon system for Far Cry 6. The starting point for any weapon system is how the player actually earns and unlocks the weapons in the first place. At the meta level, an ideal weapon unlock system rewards progression in the core of the game, as well as enhancing the peripheral experience and providing incentives and benefits for exploring the parts of the game that are well off of the main path. Past Far Cry games have had varying degrees of success at accomplishing these goals. For example, Far Cry 3 and 4 mainly rewarded story progression, as the majority of normal guns were unlocked by completing certain missions, and better guns became available to purchase as the player progressed further into the story. However, they each added a little flair with the inclusion of signature weapons, which were specially equipped or upgraded versions of the base guns that could only be unlocked by completing certain challenges and side missions. This system was very simple, but it did a good job of encouraging and rewarding the player for doing more than just playing straight through the main story and then quitting the game. However, one downside of the signature weapons is that they often felt underwhelming because they were just reskins of weapons you could already unlock through the conventional progression, and as a result, few of them really felt like worthy rewards for the tasks that the player had to complete in order to earn access to them. In contrast, Far Cry 5 had an even more streamlined system, getting rid of the signature weapons and instead tying all weapon unlocks to open world and story progression, which were essentially bundled together using the resistance meter system in each of the game's 3 regions. Unlocks were simply based on how far you had made it through the game, and doing side missions or specific challenges didn't earn the player anything specific except to the extent that these activities contributed small amounts of resistance points toward liberating each region. Once a gun was unlocked, all the player had to do was buy it in the store. Finally, New Dawn and Far Cry Primal, due to their unique settings, each relied on crafting systems in which the player had to scavenge the required materials to build any given weapon and earn the skills required to craft it. These weapon unlocks were particularly interesting because they were not directly tied to the story progression at all, but they were still rewarding in their own way as they required a deep exploration of the map, which was very enjoyable in both of these games because of their unconventional but extremely beautiful settings. An ideal weapon system for Far Cry 6 would combine all of the best parts of these experiences of these varying weapon unlocking systems. I think a majority of the weapons, especially basic ones like standard shotguns, assault rifles, SMGs, and sniper rifles, should simply be tied to the story progression and become available for purchase in in-game shops whenever the player reaches certain story checkpoints. However, other weapons should only be unlockable by doing certain side missions, interacting with certain characters, or exploring certain areas. For example, the developers have promised a diverse landscape and have said that there will be many different rebel factions within the Libertad movement, of which the player is a part. Perhaps some of these factions only use weapons that are better suited to the terrain that they operate in, and the player must complete side missions and challenges in these areas in order to unlock those specific weapons. Also, some of the more creative and makeshift weapons, such as the Discos Locos disc launcher available in the pre-order pack, should have to be crafted instead of simply bought. Generally, the better the weapon, the more difficult it should be to find the parts for it. There could even be extremely rare or special weapons that have their parts scattered in a particular region and require a deep and careful exploration of that area in order to find all of them and craft the weapons. The vast majority of the weapons that can't be purchased in stores should be truly unique options, not simple reskins or slight upgrades of the basic guns. Again, the goal of this system is to engage the player as much as possible with as many parts of the game as possible, while rewarding them enough that unlocking weapons actually feels worthwhile and not like an annoying chore to cross off the checklist before continuing with another activity. Unlocking, earning, and crafting weapons should be a fun experience in and of itself. Gun progression and customization, that is, the way in which the player can modify weapons after they have been unlocked and/or acquired, has been the shallowest area of Far Cry weapon systems for a long time now. In fact, Far Cry 2 is probably the last time it was actually interesting, because you had to choose certain weapon manuals for the guns you owned that would improve your performance with them by, for example, enhancing your accuracy. Since then, the Far Cry games have made customization very simple by allowing players to purchase outright any attachments or camouflage paint jobs that they want once a weapon has been unlocked. A better progression and customization system would encourage and reward continued use with a weapon and would attempt to form a sort of bond between the player and the weapon, without completely discouraging experimentation with other weapons and the full exploration of the game's variety. This is definitely a fine line to walk, but it's a desirable goal because it adds depth to the process of using a weapon and provides more goals for the player to work towards. As with the unlock system, the idea is for weapon progression to be a fun experience in itself, and not simply a requirement to get out of the way before moving on to the next activity. In my opinion, the best weapon progression system for Far Cry 6 would take a page out of some of the best and most popular multiplayer shooter games of recent years. In Titanfall 2, once a weapon is unlocked, it can be equipped but does not have any attachments available. Players must level it up by getting kills and assists with it, and as it increases in level, progressively better attachments are unlocked. In Titanfall 2, the maximum level that a weapon can reach is 20, and then the weapon reaches Gen 2, which is basically the beginning of the prestige system for the weapon. At this point, all of the attachments are unlocked, but the levels can be progressed through again and again, increasing the generation of the weapon each time, all the way up to Gen 100, which requires tens of thousands of kills. Reaching certain generation levels and completing challenges unlock new camos that can change the appearance of the weapon. Of course, this system is hardly unique, with recent Call of Duty games employing similar weapon leveling and camo earning systems. Far Cry 6 should employ something similar, except with a more robust weapon XP design that is tuned for a single-player focused game. For example, basic kills can earn a small amount of XP, while headshots, stealth, and long-distance kills earn bonus XP. Additionally, completing certain weapon challenges, like reaching landmark numbers of total kills or time used, could provide larger one-time weapon XP bonuses. This XP would, of course, go towards leveling up the weapon, and all the standard attachments such as suppressors, extended magazines, and optics that were included in Far Cry 5 would be unlocked as the weapon level increases. Additionally, like Titanfall, the level should be able to reset in some way once the maximum level is first reached, without resetting progress, so that the players can show off if they have extreme dedication to one particular weapon. The leveling system should reward continued use of a weapon past all unlocks without penalizing switching it up. Reaching higher levels past the attachment unlocks could provide perk points or similar bonuses to the player. Also, having a much wider variety of camo options, especially some that can only be unlocked by reaching certain levels or completing certain challenges with the weapon, would be another good way to do this and would turn into symbols of prestige within the game, similar to the gold and diamond camos within the Call of Duty Black Ops games. One key point here is that balancing the rate at which weapon XP is earned and new attachments are unlocked is extremely important to the success of this system. It should take enough effort that the inclusion of this system isn't completely pointless, but still be quick enough so that players do not feel forced to grind any single weapon for an extended period of time at the exclusion of exploring the many other options. Progressing a weapon should be fun, rewarding, and something to show off, not monotonous and boring. Of course, that also relies on the guns feeling good and being enjoyable to use, which brings me to my next section, gunplay. While the Far Cry games have followed the general first-person shooter trend with aiming, shooting, moving, and reloading all becoming smoother, better animated, and more tightly controlled with each new entry, some noticeable design changes have also been made. The most important one that could significantly affect Far Cry 6 is the change made from Far Cry 4 to Far Cry 5, in which weapons switch from being hit-scan to projectile. For those that don't know what that means, in Far Cry 4 and all previous games, all weapons except for things like grenade launchers and the recurve bow would instantly hit enemies when the player shot at them as long as their aim was on target. Essentially, bullets in these games moved with infinite velocity regardless of the range of the target. In Far Cry 5, however, all weapons shot a projectile that had a set velocity and was affected by gravity. Now, bullets take time to reach their targets and will drop off and fall to the ground at long ranges. Bullet projectile technology requires the game engine to do more complicated math and often also requires graphically rendering more objects and animations, which is why older games tended to avoid it. However, now that newer systems can handle it, I don't expect this feature to go away anytime soon. There are both advantages and disadvantages to this style of shooting. The advantages are, of course, that guns behave more realistically, shooting and aiming has a higher skill ceiling, and it can be extremely satisfying to correctly lead a moving target in order to strike a fatal blow at long range. The problem, though, is that the slower bullet velocity can often take a lot of the weight out of shooting, and hitting shots, even with high-powered weapons like sniper rifles, doesn't feel nearly as impactful as with hit-scan shooting. For example, this just feels so much more powerful than this, even though they're the exact same weapon. Of course, differences in everything from animation to controller vibration also changes the feel of shooting, but I think the difference between hit scan and projectile weapons is the most important factor here. But, as I said before, projectile weapons aren't going anywhere, and they do still have some advantages. Therefore, I think the best system for Far Cry 6 keeps the shooting style of Far Cry 5, but differentiates between projectile speeds for different guns. In Far Cry 5, all bullets traveled at exactly the same velocity, regardless of the gun they were shot from. In Far Cry 6, different guns should have their own bullet velocity statistics. Pistols, SMGs, and shotguns should be relatively slow, so they feel fine at close ranges but are inaccurate and difficult to use at medium to long range. Assault rifles and LMGs should be faster, but still not quite as reliable at long range as DMRs and snipers. Those weapons, of course, should have extremely high muzzle velocities, to the point where sniper rifles feel like they are basically hit scan except at very far ranges. Not only would this be more realistic than Far Cry 5, in which the tiny subsonic 6P9 pistol had the same bullet velocity as the 50 caliber sniper rifles, but it would also solve the problem of weapons feeling underpowered or less impactful than they should. Another small gameplay mechanic to consider before moving on is different types of ammo. While some people felt this was an unnecessary overcomplication, I personally like being able to choose between standard ammo and the much more expensive armor-piercing rounds in Far Cry 5. I think this system should be brought back, although unlike in New Dawn, I still think that headshots should always be a one-shot kill on enemies, regardless of the type of ammo used, unless, of course, they are a heavy gunner or flamethrower. Sometimes the old Far Cry formula just works. If anything, the only change should be that more ammo types are available, such as incendiary ammo being available on more guns, or, please, explosive sniper ammo. One way to balance explosive 50 cal ammo would be to give it a slower bullet velocity, so that it's difficult to aim but extremely rewarding to land hits with. Lastly, many players have brought up the possibility of weapons degrading, jamming, and breaking as they did all the way back in Far Cry 2. This mechanic added an extra level of realism, excitement, and suspense to gunfights, but it ultimately hasn't returned in any Far Cry game since, because too many players found it frustrating and too random. However, I believe there is a middle ground. Like Far Cry 2, in Far Cry 6, weapons scavenged from enemies should be in worse condition and much more likely to jam and break. However, guns purchased from stores should be in better condition and take much longer to degrade. Additionally, one of the upgrades that can be earned by leveling up a gun would be a quality guarantee, ensuring that it no longer degrades or jams. This upgrade should, of course, be optional to equip, so that players who still want the extra challenge of weapon deterioration can experience it, but those who would rather not worry about it can avoid it without too much effort. This is a great opportunity for Far Cry 6 to make everyone happy and harken back to its more hardcore Far Cry 2 roots. Lastly, I want to discuss a peripheral feature that involves the weapon system but isn't directly related to one of the aspects I've already addressed. In my proposed system, since it will take a little bit more investment of the player's time to use a weapon and unlock all of the desired attachments for it after purchasing it, I think it's important to give players a way to try out weapons and attachments before investing in them. For this reason, Far Cry 6 should have a shooting range where any weapons that have been unlocked but not yet purchased can be tested, including equipping any unlockable attachments before buying them. Ideally, the range would have multiple modes and types of targets to choose from, such as different distances of targets and choices like stationary versus moving targets, and maybe even a vehicle range for explosive weapons. Such a shooting range doesn't need to be limited to just testing out prospective purchases, though. Weapons that have already been bought could be used on the range to complete challenges and earn weapon XP towards leveling up the gun, as well as gaining insight into interesting stats like percentage accuracy and time to complete a range course. Finally, there could also be leaderboards for each range mode and weapon where players can compete against their online friends and the entire Far Cry player base for the top spots and best times, with in-game currency rewards for beating other people's times. Overall, a shooting range could be a really fun hub of activity within Far Cry 6, and would fit perfectly with the rest of the system I've outlined. That's just about all of the ideas I have for weapons in Far Cry 6. What do you think? Do you like my suggestions, or do you feel like I got something wrong? Maybe you think weapon jamming shouldn't be brought back, or you believe there's a different solution to the hit scan versus projectile dilemma. Whatever your thoughts are, be sure to let me know in the comments and subscribe for more Far Cry 6 content like this. On a final note, especially if you're a subscriber of mine, be sure to read the description because I always put important information in there. If you've made it this far, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.